I wanted to talk briefly about how to manage our emotions as parents of kids who have celiac disease. So it's important to remember that our kids learn about how to handle their emotions by watching how we handle our emotions. We're allowed to get upset. We're allowed to get sad. We're allowed to get frustrated, but it's how we get upset and sad and frustrated and then how we get out of those emotions that really teaches our kids what's appropriate and what's not. It's okay to have complex feelings about our kids' diagnoses. And it's really important to be able to label and acknowledge those feelings because it, again, teaches our children not only that these feelings are real and that they're valid, but that there's a vocabulary. Speaking about our emotions, like I said, not only validates what's going on in our own feelings and our own experiences and our family's experiences, but we give words and rise to all of those feelings that our children are going through. They don't know necessarily, depending on their age, how to express themselves. So when we're able to say, hey, I'm really frustrated because, or I'm sad that you can't have whatever, we allow our children to understand that this is happening and that this is how I feel, and they have a word for it. Sometimes we can often feel overwhelmed by our emotions, especially when it comes to this diagnosis, right? Especially if you're first diagnosed or your child is first diagnosed and they have their first Halloween party, or some schools still have class parties where parents are bringing in cupcakes. It's okay to feel overwhelmed where you're going to a pizza place for a birthday party or you're going to the bowling alley. Oftentimes these things happen. It's important to be able to ground ourselves and to recognize how to calm down when we are overwhelmed. And this is a really easy, quick, probably when you're used to doing it, takes about 20 seconds, grounding technique. It uses the 5 senses. So you don't need to bring anything with you. You don't need to have to smell something or step away. You look around the room, name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 that you can smell, and 1 that you can taste. In this way, we get out of our head and all of those thoughts that may be really loud and overwhelming to us. And it brings us back into our body and in the moment. And once we're back in our body and in the moment, then we can do something, whatever that is, figuring out how to feed our child in the moment, making sure that they're included, no matter where they are. There's actually quite a few studies out there that discuss celiac disease regarding the family, the diagnosis. And in one particular study that I thought was very interesting, moms, dads, and siblings all had different positive and negative feelings about the diagnosis and about the family. So the moms really felt more of the burden when it came to lifestyle changes and managing the gluten-free diet. But they also recognized that there was an opportunity here to be a more creative cook and to introduce new things that they would be responsible for. They viewed that as a positive for their families. The fathers did not have that same feelings. They ended up feeling guilty for carrying the gene more often. And they also regretted the limited food choices at home and at restaurants. But they were able to recognize that there are new family traditions that were brought upon by the celiac diagnosis that were positives for them and the family. Siblings also regretted the limited food choices at restaurants at home, but it turns out that they were able to recognize, the siblings reported themselves, that they were more empathetic to other people since the celiac diagnosis of their sibling. So there are all of these complex mixed emotions, and they're valid and they're real. And I think we could all speak to that also in our own lived experience. There is that sense of grief, right, for the person going through the diagnosis, often which takes a very long time to get, but also for the family. There's that grief with the loss of the former diet that they had. There's a social confidence that's missing. The grief of missing social activities, which tend to lead to a change in personal and social identities, because now you feel like you can't, or your child can't do what they used to do. everyone in the family is affected, and it's important to remember that. So if you're feeling upset and you're not the one with the diagnosis, it's still okay because you are part of it, right? You're living the diagnosis with the child. You're part of the family. It's a whole group thing. But study after study all showed that being part of a community and a support network mitigates the psychosocial effects of the celiac disease diagnosis. So all of these feelings of grief and loss tend to be mitigated when you have an appropriate community to be part of. You don't feel so alone. You don't lose your identity, right? You gain a new one. You are able to regain your social confidence and engage even in social activities with food that is not gluten-free with other people because you know that you're still part of a group, even if that group isn't present. So oftentimes when we speak about grief, we speak about the 5 stages of grief. Um, there's a question as to how many stages there are. Really, just knowing that there are different parts of grief is what's important. Not everybody goes through every stage all the time, and they're not linear. So it's not stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3, and you have to go through that. And it doesn't necessarily happen right away. It can happen later. But these are common feelings that people have and thoughts that people have when it comes to grief. And you are grieving the person that you were or the child that you thought you were going to raise when you get this diagnosis. So oftentimes there's a denial. I work with a family now, and the mom has celiac. She will not get her children tested, and she will not follow the gluten-free diet, no matter what I say. And she's like, nah, it's not so bad. No, it's not worth the fight. Nah, I'll figure it out. It's fine. I'm fine. She's absolutely in denial. Um, with parents, and oftentimes, like we saw earlier with fathers, there's that anger at themselves that I passed along this gene, that I did this to my child. We don't often see bargaining. Usually that's with a higher deity, oh, if I do this, maybe it won't happen. That's not necessarily what we're seeing here when it comes to the diagnosis. But we do see depression sometimes. Oftentimes, this is where ARFID comes in, which is avoidant food restrictive intake disorder. There is a higher incidence of eating disorders in the celiac community because of being unsure of what to eat, of how to eat. We will often see kids that refuse to eat or won't go out with others because of this. But again, we can get to that acceptance phase where, knowing that we have this supportive community, we do find that self-esteem improves, and being able to accept the diagnosis and accept ourselves. Even with the children, they're able to accept themselves and the diagnosis, and it's just not a big deal once we hit this acceptance, and that occurs oftentimes when we find the supportive community. It's important to remember that just because you are at school with all of your non-gluten-free friends, knowing that you're a part of a community outside of the school, knowing that that community is there, the effects are still mitigated. You do not have to be in the community at that moment to not feel the effects, right? We see this is true in friendships. We see this is true in depression studies. So across the board, as long as you know you have one friend, as long as you know you're part of a community, you don't have to be currently entrenched in the community to get the benefits of being part of the community. And this then goes back to finding our tribe. Studies have found that being part of a supportive celiac community enables patients and their families to reestablish all of those identities that they feel lost. And it increases social recognition and acceptance of the diagnosis, both within ourselves and within the greater community that we interact with. This in turn mitigates that grief and guilt that parents often feel when their child is diagnosed. So finding your tribe not only helps yourself as a parent, but helps the child, even if you're part of the community and the child is not necessarily part of the community. Again, if it's just a community of adults, it's okay, because the child will get all of these benefits when we as parents find our tribe. When mom is calm, everybody's calm, right? So the same is true here.